it happened in 3 phases. The first phase, they had to move the blacks out of the vicinity of the whites by pushing them in faraway locations. And they left nature as pristine. To them, the blacks were not allowed to be closer to nature. But it didn't end there. It moved on to the second phase, where they had now to separate the blacks again, according to the ethnicity, and they had to stay in particular locations. It went to the third level, where the blacks were not allowed to use any other resources that were used by whites. During apartheid era, you will find out that the laws that I've mentioned, such as the Group Areas Act, the Separations Amenities Act, they were not specifically made for conservation sector, but they would have a direct impact in the sector, whereby the black person is to stay away. The areas were highly guarded. You needed a pass to go closer to nature.
If you had a look at what was going on in Zimbabwe, or what was then Southern Rhodesia, Northern Rhodesia, Kenya, and so on, I don't think there was anything special that you could identify in terms of an apartheid effect, other than the fact that under the apartheid government, the government had greater powers to do whatever they wanted to do. So if they wanted to set aside land, they did it in a more totalitarian or absolute sort of way. In a sense, conservation is a luxury that only the middle and upper middle class and the very wealthy can afford to think about. In the apartheid system, the access was controlled by skin color. Now, today, the access is controlled by relative wealth and class structure. For local South Africans, they could go to places like the Kruger National Park, but the private game reserves were set up to really provide an elite experience that was quite expensive. While a tourist may be willing to spend a few $1,000s or euros for a tourist experience, game hunters were willing to come in and pay tens of thousands of dollars or tens of thousands of euros, and maybe even more, to capture, have the right to shoot big game like elephant, lion, and trophy animals. So you had a development of the trophy industry, the trophy hunting industry, and the tourism industry that actually left poorer people out in the cold. So it was really more of a class thing than a race thing.
According to South African national parks, majority of the visitors or day visitors, be it excursionists or tourists, majority of the visitors, they are whites. Not considering whether they are South Africans or international, but most of them, they are whites. Even if we are to consider local statistics, majority of them who visit those places, they are whites. And the least populous is blacks. Those who have gone a bit up in social life, those who now earn a bit more, those who are now positioned in those positions which are a bit higher, they can now take care of conservation, take care of wildlife. They've developed that love.
South Africa is somewhat fortunate in that rising sea levels are not going to be as threatening as they are to, say, the Netherlands or to Venice or even to New York. But certainly the changes in temperature and climate patterns, and with it come along cycles that affect rainfall patterns. So drought cycles are going to be devastating to South Africa. And we've already seen some effects of that. And then what's going to happen to the water delivery system. So we've seen in Cape Town the effects of a drought cycle on being able to supply everybody in the metropolitan area with water. But that doesn't address the issues of food production. And if you have a look at food production, who are the people who have the least access to food? The rural poor. And then also, in some places, the urban poor. And so that's going to be of enormous significance. From the 1960s into the 1970s and 80s, European powers, especially the Polish and Eastern Europeans, were coming into African waters, off the coast of West Africa especially, to exploit the rich fisheries that traditionally were exploited in countries like Senegal and other West African countries. And these fishing grounds were overexploited, and the local indigenous fishermen were getting less and less fish, and the populations were growing. And at that point, they turned to exploiting more bushmeat. So the bushmeat markets became more important. And in fact, this bushmeat trade is one of the things that has put the human population at greater risk for outbreaks like Ebola and the coronavirus. South Africa is a bigger polluter than, say, France, which is interesting because South Africa is not nearly as industrialized as France. And so relatively speaking, we have an inefficient economy which pollutes per capita. But it's a blip in the ocean if you add the 3 or 4 biggest polluters together. So if you take China at the top and the United States and the Soviet Union, well, Russia and India, and you have a look at their share, I mean, that's the lion's share. So the 2 most important effects of global change, which are shift in climate and temperature conditions and rising sea levels, this has nothing to do with borders of any country whatsoever.
We need each other. Have you ever questioned yourself that why do we have trees like this which are green? Some trees, they are a bit yellow. Some trees, they are a bit reddish. Some of them, they are a bit purple. Have you ever seen these trees fighting? If you go in the wild, you see there's what we call an ecosystem, where we have elephants, rhinos, and lizards as well, and ants. But they live together, they need each other. That's what we call an ecosystem. So the thing now of balancing an ecosystem within us as South Africans, as human beings, who are blessed with the thinking capacity, it's a challenge.